And welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I am with one of the authors whom I love and admire, and if you read Cozies, you should be reading her. We have Leslie Budewitz. And then I have your very impressive bio. Leslie Budewitz blends her passion for food, great mysteries in the Northwest into two lighthearted mystery series, The Spice Shop Mysteries, set in Seattle, and then the Food Lovers Village Mysteries set in Northwest Montana. I love the covers of your books.
Aren't they fun?
They're so beautiful. And then your books focus on strong women who share her passions and have a talent for finding trouble, which I love the exclamation point at the end of that. You graduated from Seattle University and Notre Dame Law School, and you still are a lawyer part-time?
Very part-time.
That is incredible. And then you're very involved when it comes to the mystery world as well, with Sisters in Crimes. You're a founding member of Guppies, which I ended up going from link to link to link to find out more about that. And then you do your own chapter with Mystery Writers of America and Montana Women Writers. Is that all of them?
Well, with Mystery Writers of America, I'm no longer on the board of the regional chapter. I'm on the national board.
Oh, you're just on the national board. That's all. Just on the national. Not a big deal.
Stand-up trouble.
I mean, I still think it's incredibly impressive. Again, I'm trying very hard not to fangirl on her right now. My first question has to be, what got you interested in cozy mysteries?
So, just like most writers and most serious readers, I have been reading a wide variety of things my entire life, but one of my very first reading loves were the Happy Hollisters.
Oh.
And you are far too young to have ever even heard of the Happy Hollisters, although I think they are being reissued. Girl moment here. I got a Facebook like and note from the Happy Hollisters. Well, it's the grandchildren of the man who wrote them.
That's so cool.
They have the rights and they are reissuing them. They started in the 30s and they were published through the 60s when I was a child, and now they're coming back out again. And so the Happy Hollisters liked me on Facebook. That was my fan kid moment. They were a lot of fun, and then I graduated to the Bobbsey twins and Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys and on to Agatha Christie. And as you said, I took a little bit of a detour and had a legal career.
You've incorporated into the writing.
I have indeed. So probably about 20 years ago, I decided that I wanted to write seriously. I've always been interested in that, but I didn't really think it was something you could do. Well, I was living in Western Montana, where I still live, and I was teaching at the University of Montana, helping teach a writing class there, a legal writing class. And I was doing a lot of driving back and forth.
Yeah.
And I was listening to books on tape, and they actually were on tape in those dark ages.
I had them growing up. I had the tapes.
And so a lot of them happened to be mystery. So I listened to Sarah Paretsky and Sue Grafton and Ellis Peters with the Brother Cadfael series and Elizabeth Peters with the Amelia Peabody series.
Wow.
And most importantly, Tony Hillerman's Leaphorn and Cheese series. And I say most importantly because those books are set in the Southwest. And there I was living on an Indian reservation in Western Montana, and I realized this could be a place where mysteries could be set too. So I started writing then, and I wrote several manuscripts that are not published. A few years later, decided that I would write this nonfiction book, and we can come back and talk about that. But then I realized I wasn't finished writing my own stories, and that's when I decided to start writing the cozy mystery. Cozies were very popular then. It was possible to get a contract without writing the full book first.
Wow.
And so through my friends in the Guppies, particularly Peg Cochran and Daryl Wood Gerber and Krista Davis, I was able to create a proposal and get that sold. And I picked the Cozies because they are so much fun to write and read. And I picked the food angle because I'm obsessed with food.
I mean, I have to admit, I think you have some of the best puns in all of Cozy Mysteries.
I could take credit for all of them. I can't. Some of them were mine, but others come from the publisher.
So I lent this book to my mom, so I don't have a physical copy with me because she's a little bit of a slower reader than I am. So she has my copy of A Salt and Pepper, and I love how you have her name as Pepper, and then that's the title of the book, and it was so perfect.
That one is perfect, and the other one that I really love is Crime Rib, which is the second Food Lovers Village mystery, and that is set at a summer arts festival and a steak grill-off. And that was not my original title, but when the publisher, Berkeley, a division of Penguin Random House, came back with Crime Rib, I couldn't decide whether it was perfectly stupid or stupidly perfect. It's just exactly right.
It's amazing.
The one that's the most laughs is Butter Off Dead. That's
That is a
Murder
good
at a
one.
Food Lovers Film Festival. So movies, popcorn, butter. You see how
I
my
love
mind
it.
works.
I was going to ask you about this a little later, but this is a perfect segue because you have a new book coming out, which I think has one of my favorite titles of all time because I'm a chai tea drinker. That is one of my go-to drinks at Starbucks, the chai tea latte. Whenever I, having that 2 o'clock feeling, that's my go-to. So as soon as I saw the title for your book, I'm going pre-order. Go on Goodreads, gotta add this to the to-be read list.
And the title is
Chai
Another Day.
It is amazing. I love that title so much.
Remember, of course, that in the Spice Shop series, which is set in Seattle, my main character runs a spice shop in the Pike Place Market. She and her girlfriends have a movie gathering every week, and sometimes they actually do watch a movie. And they call themselves the Flick Chicks, of course. And you can guess what movie they're going to be watching.
In Chai Another Day?
Mm-hmm.
Die Another Day?
They are indeed going to go in deep into the Bond canon.
I'd be very intrigued if it wasn't that one.
There are actually a couple of movies mentioned in that book, but the, not the final scene, but let's see, how can I say it without spoilers? The climactic scene occurs the night of the Flick Chicks gathering at Sifa's apartment. And it's Bond night.
If they do the marathon, it'll take them a little while to get through all the Bond movies.
Well, they're only going to be watching the one, and there may be things that happen that disrupt the movie.
Interesting. See, everyone needs to go buy this book and read it. It just needs to be done. You are prolific when it comes to cozies. What do you think, as a reader and a writer, what do you think makes a great cozy?
So I have a theory about the cozy that is a little bit different than what you hear from some people. First of all, the great Carolyn Hart, whom we all know and love, and her books are heaven. She doesn't like the term because she says that these kinds of books typically take place in a small town, although obviously not always, and we can talk more about that.
That's actually one of my questions for you.
Nothing more uncomfortable than murder in a small town. And I live in a town of less than 3,000 people. I know that that is absolutely true. We are all deeply affected when something tragic happens, and I never want to forget that. Despite the humor and the food and all the rest of it, there is always a crime that is at the heart of the story, and it has to affect people, or else you, the reader, will not be having an emotional experience yourself, and you won't be interested in the book. So she's right about that, but I like the term because what happens when a crime hits a small town or a community within a community, which is what we have with the Seattle series, is there are these ripple effects. It affects the social order. Now the official investigation, the law enforcement investigation, their job is to restore external order by finding the culprit and bringing that person to justice. Our amateur sleuth works from the inside. She knows people. She knows what's going on in that community, whether it is the small town or whether it's Cleo Coyle's coffee community in the Coffee House Mysteries, the museum community in Sheila Connelly's Museum Mysteries. There's some sort of group, and the amateur sleuth knows that community. She sees and hears things that official investigators can't see. She can ask questions they can't ask. She understands the context of what's happened. And so ultimately her investigation is necessary because not only does she very typically find the culprit and provide the information to law enforcement, she restores the internal social order. Ultimately, these books are about community.
This is such a brilliant answer.
And that's why I love the term cozy.
This is the most eloquent, beautiful answer. Everything you just said is amazing.
Well, thank you.
And I can tell you're a writer because you're so eloquent with your word selections and everything else. I mean, it's so true though, because a lot of the time when you see the puns, you do kind of glaze over the murder because it is off the page. So I kind of like that you keep that in mind, because a lot of times you're investigating the murder, but you don't always think about the consequences of it.
Let me detour here slightly for your audience and point out that this water bottle is the Malice Domestic logo with the T and the teacup and the skull on the T tag and the smoke that has kind of an evil look to it, or steam that has kind of an evil look to it. We thought we would make a little prop out of it. Well, I appreciate your comments there, Angela, because I think that there's a range in the cozy mystery.
Yeah.
There is the very light, and then there's the edgier. And I'm probably kind of right in the middle, especially with the Food Lovers Village series.
Yeah.
The Spice Shop series, it's not dark by any means, but there are social justice issues in there.
Yeah, the first book, it was the death of a homeless man. I mean, there is a little bit of a political undertone when you think about it in those regards.
In that book, A Salt and Pepper, there is the death of the homeless man in the market. There are other homeless or semi-homed people, but they are part of life. Yeah. We also have the relationship of a man and his daughter, and a history there, and so there's a lot going on. In Guilty as Cinnamon, there's a little bit of a backstory of some domestic abuse, and in Killing Time, that there's a cold case that brings up some of the social justice issues that Pepper's family was involved in when she was a child. So they're in there. I can't help it. I'm a Jesuit-educated lawyer.
I mean, but you handle it in a way where it's not ham-fisted. It's definitely, you integrate it very well into the narrative, which is, I think, a writing ability unto itself.
Thanks.
Some of the time you can tell when someone goes back after they've written and they just decide to, throw something else in there, whether it be a pun or something. But there's a very nice flow, and there's no, I'm going to insert my own opinions right here.
Some people think of the cozy as just that light side, but one of the most respected, prolific, best-selling cozy writers has been Diane Mott Davidson, who unfortunately isn't writing anymore. But her books gave us a model or an example where we could use food, but we could also use social justice issues because she brings them in. And they're part of life. We can still have a book with no graphic sex or violence and lots of graphic food and still touch on some of these other issues without, as you say, being too heavy, because I realize that a lot of people want to read these things to get a break from the world or while they're in the bathtub.
I mean, I also think it offers an element of realism because you are writing contemporary stories, and so that is the world we live in. That's reflective of everyday life. You have to be published, but is there anything else you're currently writing?
So Try Another Day will be out in June, and I am currently working on the 5th Spice Shop mystery, which will be out next year. I'm not sure exactly when.
Oh, so you're going to keep me waiting?
I am.
It's okay. I forgive you.
The publisher is keeping me waiting, so we'll find out.
You're prolific, and you're so impressive. You have so many different things that you've written and are working on. So I'm curious, what does a typical writing day for you look like?
So I treat writing as a job, because it really is my career right now. I just do a very small amount of legal work right now. And I try to be on the page by 8:30 or 9 o'clock and work all morning and then work all afternoon too. It's not always writing time. There's research, there's a lot of promotion, especially as we get closer to a book launch. And then there's occasional pauses for things like proofreading, copy edits, and proof edits and that sort of thing. The last 3 years, I have written 2 short stories a year. I've never been much of a short story writer. That's half my total output in the last couple of years. But this just happens to be Short Story Week, so if I can hijack the conversation for a moment, I'll go to that. This week, a short story that I wrote, I started many years ago and finally finished, set it aside and finally came back to it and finished it, called With My Eyes, was published in Suspense magazine in February of 2018, and this week it won the Derringer Award, which is given by the Short Mystery Fiction
Congratulations!
Thank you.
This is so incredible.
Derringers, you get the pun. They're the very short-nosed, snubbed revolver. And that story, With My Eyes, involves a young Seattle banker who sees what he wants to see when he falls in love with a beautiful Greek woman, and then makes an eye-opening trip to Athens.
Oh,
and unfortunately, that story isn't currently available except to subscribers of Suspense magazine, but I'll see if I can make that available on my website.
I was going to say, I want to read this now so badly.
The one you can read is All God's Sparrows, which was published a little over a year ago in Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine, and it is nominated for the Agatha Award for Best Short Story. That's very exciting. It was my first foray into historical fiction. And can I tell your readers about it?
Yes, go for it.
It's set in Montana Territory in 1885, and it features a real-life historical figure named Mary Fields, who was born in slavery in Tennessee in 1832, and who came west in 1885 to nurse a woman whose family she had worked for in Ohio. And the woman was Mother Amadeus Dunn, who was the Mother Superior of the Ursuline Sisters in Montana, who were missionary sisters. And she ran a school for girls at the St. Peter's Mission. She was ill with pneumonia, and Mary came out to nurse her successfully, and then she stayed. And she was quite an amazing character. She was known as Stagecoach Mary because later she drove a stagecoach. She was also called Black Mary, and she was the second woman and the first black woman to be a postmistress in the country.
Oh.
She was literate, but she didn't leave a written record. And so through other people's records, the Ursulines in particular, I've learned a fair amount about her. And in this story, which is called All God's Sparrows, she and a young nun in the order meet a young woman and her daughter who are in a desperate situation, and they devise a very clever solution. It's a lot of fun to work with her. There will be a second Mary Fields story in Alfred Hitchcock later this year, and there's a third one in their submissions queue.
Wow.
Then you've got a copy of Malice Domestic's newest anthology,
Whoa.
Murder Most
That
Edible.
one really wants to fall down on me.
And there's a Food Lovers Village short story in that.
Thought of you though when I saw the cover, because again, every time now I think of chai tea, I'm gonna be thinking of you.
Don't worry, the chai is not poisoned. It's not a spoiler to say there is no poison tea.
I mean, again, I'm a short little blonde, so my kind usually die off very quickly when it comes to suspense and mysteries. So it's nice to know that's one less thing for me to worry about. My chai tea being poisoned. And I was able to get a hardcover copy. They only had a few left, and so I was able to sneak one.
So if you have read As the Christmas Cookie Crumbles, which is the 5th of the Food Lovers Village mysteries, the short story takes place right after it. But there are no spoilers. You can read the short story in any order.
Okay, so that's kind of nice. So if you just have this and get a little tidbit of your rating and then go read everything else.
Yes. Another way to do that is there is another Food Lovers Village mystery short story called Carried to the Grave, which is available as a free download on my website for newsletter subscribers.
You have a very impressive website. You also have the recipes, and you actually have the recipe correction section.
Well, unfortunately, if you write recipes in books or on blogs, occasionally are going to make a mistake. And
recipes, short stories, you have blog posts. I mean, you really do have a lot of things to get
the
done.
recipes are a lot of fun. Some of them are truly my own invention, others are not. They're adaptations or revisions of other people's recipes, and that's standard in the cooking world. So, you know, we follow the same rules as cookbook writers do for creating recipes. They are a lot of fun. You mentioned the blog. I blog with Mystery Lovers Kitchen. It's mysteryloverskitchen.com. There are 9 or 10 of us who are all mystery writers cooking up crimes and recipes. And I'm on Tuesdays. I share Tuesdays with Cleo Coyle, who is one of my inspirations.
I know that's a recognizable name for cozy mystery readers.
Yeah,
as soon as you say that, they're going, I've read her books.
And they would probably have a similar reaction to some of the other names too. Sheila Connolly, Krista Davis.
You have so many books to get written, and so I asked you about your average day, but are you a plotter or are you a pantster?
Yes.
You're a plotter? You're a pantster? Neither?
I'm both.
Interesting.
So, for those of you who don't know what the terms mean, I once referred to pantser, and someone didn't hear me right and came up afterwards and asked me, what's a panther? It's a large black cat who lives in the wild. I'm so sorry you sat through that whole talk without realizing what I was actually saying. So what that means is, do you work out the plot of your story in advance, or do you write it by the seat of your pants? And I do a little bit of both. I call myself a planner rather than an outliner or a plotter, because the plot is not the driving force, it's the characters that are the driving force. Obviously in mystery we have to have a very solid plot that hangs together. Some of us are more successful than others of us, but it's always the goal. But it's really the characters who drive things. So I start with them and the scenario. Fortunately, because I'm writing series, I already have the setting and the recurring characters worked out. And I just try to think about what would they happen? Excuse me, what would happen, what would they do? What's the order of things? And I just, as I'm thinking about it and cogitating, I make notes and I try to put them in some rough time sequence order, and that's my outline. Sometimes it's all the way to the end, sometimes it's not, and I fill in the gaps. But also things change as you write. I liken it to a roadmap for driving. I live in Northwest Montana. If I were driving from Kalispell to Tampa, I wouldn't just get in the car and go. I'd get out a map and I'd figure out where I was going to stop for the night, where was my old high school friend who I wanted to stop and see, so that I didn't go 100 miles past and realize, oh shoot, I meant to stop. But I wouldn't work out where I was going to have lunch. You know, you just work out certain things, and you hit the high points and you plan those, and then you can take your detours along the way.
I love that example so much.
So another thing I will say is that the process is different for every book. So if you work on something and you say, this isn't really the way I did it before, that's all right, because every book has its own process. Once you've written a couple, you think, well, I know how to do it. It's an illusion.
There's a quote, it's a craft where no one ever becomes a master.
I hadn't heard that one. That's great. There's a quote attributed to Somerset Maugham. There are 3 rules for writing fiction. Unfortunately, no one knows what they are. But he also said something else that goes back to one of your earlier questions about the schedule. And that is, he said he wrote only when he was inspired. But he saw to it that he was inspired every morning at 9 o'clock.
One of the questions that I wanted to ask you was, what is your most interesting writing quirk?
I can't write listening to music because I'm too interested in the music. I suddenly am singing the song or thinking about the music in my head instead of thinking about the characters. You know, none of us knows what our own quirks are. We don't recognize them as quirks, so I guess I can't really
is there
answer.
something where, you know, you have to have a cup of tea next to you? Is it a chai tea? Is there something you have to do before you sit down to write?
No, not really. Just sit there and do it. You just have to stay on the page. You cannot solve the problems on the page by leaving the page. There is, however, the exception of going down to wash the dishes just to let things bobble around in your head, as long as you set the intention of staying focused on the story instead of letting yourself think about dinner next weekend.
So when you do work, do you think of it in regards to time, or do you think of trying to hit a certain word count or page count?
Page count.
Okay.
But of course that doesn't happen in the planning stages or even in the editing stages. But in the composition phase, then I aim for 10 pages a day. But it takes me a few scenes, a couple chapters to know enough about the story to get that flow going.
Interesting. Because 10 pages, I mean, that's quite...
about 2,500 words.
I was going to say, that's a fair word count.
And sometimes it can happen by noon, and sometimes it takes all day.
So will you keep writing until you hit your 10 pages?
Mm-hmm.
So again, if you hit it by noon, you're able to call it an early day, and if not, are you going to be writing until 9 o'clock at night?
There's never really an early day, because then you have to go do a blog post or some other writing related task. So, I do treat it pretty much as a full-time job.
Are you able to turn it off at 5 though, and then be able to step away from it? Because a lot of writers will always say, oh, I have my notebook, oh, I'm always in the mindset. Are you able to do that?
Yes and no. I usually try to leave my office by about 5:30. My husband might laugh at my saying that. It depends who's in charge of dinner, I suppose. And I may go back upstairs during the evening to make some notes. I may spend some time during the evening on my Facebook author page or something else. Yeah. I don't really try to turn it off completely, because it's just a big part of what I do and who I am, and I love it.
So you've written quite a few stories, but I was curious if you have a favorite character that you've written.
Well, I mentioned Mary Fields. I really like her. She's one of those larger-than-life characters who really capture our imagination. Mm-hmm. There's a gal in the Food Lovers Village series. She came along during, I think she came along during Trouble at the Jam Fest, and her name is Lou Mary, and she's a shop assistant, and she's a wisecracker, and I really enjoy her. I also love Old Ned, who is the next door neighbor and barkeeper and kind of the town's grandfather.
You've done something that I consider unique, because cozies tend to be pretty much small town mysteries, but you have a community within a community, as you mentioned, when you go to the Spice Shop series, because they're in Seattle, but it's almost a community within Seattle.
It is. The main character, Pepper Reese, owns a spice shop in the market, and she always says she feels from her name that even though she was not named for her shop, she was destined for it. She got the nickname Pepper as a little girl long before she became a spice shop owner. It is a community within a community, because that shop is in Pike Place Market, and I fell in love with the market when I was an 18-year-old college freshman. It had just been recently saved from the wrecking ball by the voters, and it's the oldest continually operating, I said that wrong, the longest continuously operating market in the country. It's been in continuous operation since 1907. It closes on Christmas and Easter, and that's it. It is open 364 days or 63 days a year. And it's changed, it's evolved a lot over the years. When I first moved to Seattle in the late 70s, it was still a place where people did regular grocery shopping. Now grocery stores have changed, and so you can get a lot of specialty items at your local grocer that you couldn't so much anymore. And so there's a little bit more need for market shops to focus on tourism than there used to be. So there's that evolution, and that's part of the tension in the market, part of the ongoing undercurrent in the series. So the crimes that show up in these books sometimes relate directly to the market, and sometimes they relate to the spice and restaurant community that Pepper's involved in. We mentioned Cleo Coyle's Coffee House Mysteries earlier, and they truly are one of my inspirations, because they were, I think, if not the first, certainly the first very successful urban cozy.
Yeah.
To do an urban cozy, you've got to have that defined community.
It's a subgenre within a subgenre to a certain degree.
Sort of it is, and you're right that there aren't a lot of them. There's mine and Cleo's, I mentioned Sheila Connolly's museum series. Laura Childs, who is my cousin under her real name.
Really?
It's a couple of series set in cities. Charleston, which is a small city, and New Orleans, which is a large one. There aren't very many others. Oh, the marvelous Kate Carlisle.
Yes.
Her bookbinder series is set in San Francisco.
That's true too.
And that's set in the book and antique and auction worlds.
So I do have hopefully some fun questions.
Okay.
I have either or questions for you, and so Sherlock or Watson?
Yes.
Both?
So I'll twist my answer and say that Sherlock and Sherlock Holmes is my husband's favorite sleuth and favorite movies to rewatch. That and some Bruce Lee films, and we love the Jeremy Brett version of Sherlock. So here's one of it's a parallel to the "Who's your favorite Bond?" Question that comes up in China Another Day. Who's your favorite Sherlock? Well, for us, it's Jeremy Brett, and he had two Watsons, and so there were two, David Burke and Ted Hardwicke, and I choose Ted Hardwicke.
So he wins over Benedict Cumberbatch?
Yes.
You didn't miss a beat. You knew that.
Sorry,
answer.
Cumberbatch is cute and he's sexier, but the movies are not my favorite. They're too hard to follow. It's like they want you to be so impressed by how brilliant Sherlock is that they speed up the sound of what Cumberbatch is saying, and I can't follow it because he's talking too fast. They are fun. They are a lot of fun, and I also enjoyed the two movies that Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law made.
The steampunk version.
Yeah, they were fun, but I'm a purist, I guess. Not so far back where we're not going to do the Basil Rathbone version.
Nancy Drew or Hardy Boys?
Yes.
To both?
I'm sorry I'm not helping you at all, Alan. I read them both. I even read the Hardy Boys in high school because they were so much fun. And a girlfriend of mine in high school had a stack of them from her brothers, and so we were sharing them in high school.
So hopefully these ones are a little bit easier because they're more random. Hot or cold?
Yes.
Winter or summer?
Yes.
Tea or coffee?
Well, it depends on the mood.
You don't have a favorite among them?
No.
Okay, well,
I like them both.
Mac or HP? Use an Apple computer or do you use...
Oh, no, PC. Lawyers use PCs.
Ebook or paperback?
I never thought I would appreciate an ebook. I wasn't interested in a Kindle, and a couple of years ago my mother gave us Kindles for Christmas, and I think she got a QVC special and she gave everybody Kindles. And I love it for traveling, but at home it's a hard copy.
Pen or pencil?
Pen.
Waffles or pancakes?
Neither one.
Coke or Pepsi?
Either one.
Indoors or outdoors?
Yes.
I'm kind of waiting to see if I can give you a really good... Oh, Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts? Again?
No, it's not that I can't choose. We don't have Dunkin' Donuts, and we don't have Starbucks.
Really?
Yeah, I told you I live in a really small town. I go to Fieldheads for coffee if I'm not having it at home.
Wow.
Locally owned shops.
Twitter or Facebook?
This is the first one where I can clearly answer something, I think, and it's Facebook. I'm sorry, but Twitter, I just don't understand it.
Protagonist or antagonist?
Yes, gotta have them both.
Morning or night?
Gotta have them both.
Movie or book?
Usually the book. There are a few movies made from books that are just so great. For example, I was just thinking about this one. Dr. Zhivago is one of my very favorite books, but it's also one of my very favorite movies, even though the movie doesn't bear a whole lot of resemblance to the book.
The original, I presume. That's got to be at least 2.5 hours. Usually it's rather long.
I think so. The first time I saw it, there was an intermission.
It's not as long as Gone with the Wind, but it's quite a long movie. I think you've answered all my questions, but is there something else that you wanted to mention or talk about in regards to cozy mysteries, or give advice to cozy mystery aspiring writers?
Well, my advice for writers is simple, and that is read. Read, read, read. Learn to read as a writer. There's a book by the novelist Francine Prose called Learning to Read Like a Writer, or something like that. And she goes through some detailed steps for how you can do that. But you can also figure it out on your own. Learn to start paying attention to what you read. It's also true, unfortunately, that the more you write and try to read as a writer, it can kind of spoil reading for you for a little while. But I can promise you that love will come back. But you really have to take your time to dissect the books, outline books that work well for you, reread them, look at what makes them hold together, and then trust that you're learning it. Trust your intuition. That's my main advice for writers.
That's so beautiful.
Cozy or otherwise.
You're so sweet. Thank you so much for joining me and talking with me. I aspire to be like you someday. So thank you so much. I feel so honored to get to talk to you and interview you.
Well, thank you, Angela. For writers, it is such a pleasure to meet readers, and the more enthusiastic, the better. And especially when we meet someone who really has a passion for sharing what we do with other people. It's really a great thing for us too. So thank you.
Oh, I'm very pale, so I'm sure you can see that I'm getting red in the face. Oh, you just made my entire day. I'm so glad I came to Malice Domestic now. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. Have a nice one.